I'm very pleased to have in studio with me tonight Dr. Ernest Hilaire. He is the Member of Parliament for Castries South. He is, of course, formerly the head of a number of different agencies, but of course the St. Lucia planning for the Olympics, for the World Cup, Cricket World Cup, that is, back in 2007. Of course, very much part of the political infrastructure of Dr. Kenny Anthony's first administration as attaché, as well as permanent secretary in the Ministry of Youth and Sport. Or I think it was just the Department of Youth and Sport at that time, still part of the Ministry of Education. And later on, of course, going on to the WICB, and then also serving in a capacity as High Commissioner for St. Lucia to London. So, Dr. Hilaire, thank you so very much, of course, for joining us tonight and for agreeing to be our guest. Of course, it's a very busy time for you, I know, and for perhaps every other politician in St. Lucia at this time, moving around and about. And it's also your day in the constituency, so it would always be a very busy day, of course, for Wednesdays. Now, of course, many people at this point in time in St. Lucia, persons calling in my show, the lunchroom on RCI, are asking about whether we are now a failed state. That term, failed state, seems to be coming up quite a bit for persons, because there are a number of people who are just very worried about their own circumstances, worried about their families, worried about their own economics, their own finances at their home, but they're also seeing more broadly the state of play in the country. They're hearing about, rising debt. They're seeing all these roads being built perhaps, and they're wondering how is that going to be paid back, what's going to be happening to the country, and all the decisions that are being made. And of course, at this point in time, they're also worried about the direction that the country is going to be taking. Do you subscribe to that view, first and foremost, that St. Lucia is a failed state, or we're getting to that point?
Well, first of all, Calix, let me thank you for once again having me on your program. And you just mentioned that the 2 hours would go back quickly. I've found that whenever I'm on your program, 2 hours seems almost like 15 minutes. So I think tonight I'm looking forward to a very, very interesting discussion with you. And of course, you mentioned this period and how busy it is for politicians. And you would not imagine I did not have a chance to go home and change and get ready. Because of that very reason, the campaign is on, and despite the limitations imposed by the COVID and the state of emergency, there's still a lot of busy activity taking place. And I certainly want to shout out all my constituents in Castries South and to express to them my appreciation for the opportunity to have to serve them for the last 5 years. We're now into the 6th year of the fifth, the fifth year, I don't know how to describe it. It's the 6th year of a 5-year term.
Of a 5-year term.
Yeah, so, it is a little unusual. But you ask about a failed state, and in classic political theory and even strategic studies, when one refers to a failed state, you're talking about the disintegration of the control institutions and mechanisms of the state, in that the state has lost its capacity to manage its affairs and manage and lost control of what happens within its borders. And I remember recently President Obama was making the point in reference to what had taken place in the United States and Republican Party, and he was saying this does not happen overnight with the flick of a switch. It actually occurs in discrete, distinct steps, the disintegration of the ideology that keeps a society together. So a failed state doesn't occur with one singular event. Right. It actually happens over a course of time, and the nurturing of particular features that would have emerged in the society. And if one look, and you cited a number of distinct characteristics of our modern-day St. Lucian society, you are seeing characteristics that are associated with failed states. Very high debt levels, very high social tension, high levels of crime, high levels of psychological and emotional stress in the society, leading to deviance and lawlessness. So all those are signs, and eventually, if they are not managed and reversed, can actually lead to the breakdown of the institutions of the state, and therefore, by extension, a failed state. Now, there are people that benefit from a failed state. Don't believe everybody in a society wants to avoid a failed state. They are actually, almost like scavengers that look forward to failed state scenarios so they can prosper out
And
of
then
it.
you also always have this class of people who are perhaps almost immune to what is going on around. You look at a Haiti, for instance.
Precisely.
And when you think about the poverty there, poorest
Precisely.
country in the Western Hemisphere,
Yeah.
and then yet still, you have the wealthy elites living up in Pétionville and living a very
Precisely.
luxurious
Yeah,
life,
yeah.
almost, taken away from what is going on the average, everyday level of society.
Precisely. And they create insulations, around themselves so they can live their lives in some measure of comfort, almost like in silos. So the society now becomes a series of silos. And like I said, there are people that profit off failed states and those kinds of social degradation and economic degradation as well. But for them, they can prevail. So they actually look forward to it. And which is why in a society you have to look forward, you have to look, and when those instances of political deviance as well as economic mismanagement take place, you need to correct them. And it is why the public service actually have the rules and regulations. It's to prevent individuals from acting according to their own whims and fancy and for them to just profit of the state. And we are seeing, certainly in St. Lucia in the last 5 years, many instances of decisions being taken that are not in the interest of the people and even the state. And they are being justified. And that is what is worrying, because some people are very good at justifying what is really unjustifiable. That when you sit down deep down and you reflect on the essence of what was done, there's no logical reason why it had to be done. I mean, absolutely no logical reason. But they can still justify it in their own ways.
And of course, I'm guessing you're thinking of things like Ojo Labs, for instance, where we're being told, well, this company is coming in and we're paying St. Lucian, so therefore it's okay.
Precisely.
Even though it's a foreign company.
And the Pajoa letter, the explanation I heard recently to the latest series of letters that were exposed, I mean, the justification is mind-boggling. It is really feeding on base support. And base support is like that. I mean, we call it party hacks almost. And both parties have their base that support them. And there are people that give you total uncritical support for whatever you do. And I listened to some of the attempts by surrogates of the ruling party to justify the Pajoa letters. And never before in our history have I heard of such instances. You've heard of corruption, you've heard of paybacks. You've never heard of a minister that has no authority writing a letter seeking to raise $62 million for projects that already have been funded.
Right. Now, Dr. Hilaire, you already jump in the gun perhaps, because we do want to talk about the whole issue of the Pajo letter. Yeah. But there's so much going on right now in this country. And as you said, it's sometimes very overwhelming for the average person, because they're hearing about Ojo Labs, and then they're hearing about Cabot, and then they're hearing about NIC and issue diamonds, and of course, the Pajoa letter, and of course they have perhaps even forgotten about DSH, and they perhaps even have forgotten about range and CIP funds, and so it really is very much an overwhelming situation. But of course, it's all seeming to come to a head right now, of course, in this kind of environment. But before we even go there, because we still talk this issue about failed state, and I just want to deal with it a little bit, the idea of oppression of your political opponents, political repressions. I mean, we see it, we've heard about it in other countries. We hear about political dissidents getting arrested and put into prison, and you hear these things, and you never think that, something like this would actually occur in a small St. Lucia setting. But it is almost as if we are seeing efforts by persons within the executive to utilize agents of the state, which should be somewhat independent, like the police, to engage in that type of activity. I mean, you seem to have been a victim of that. We're seeing another situation unfolding with respect to Mr. Joachim Henry, very unfortunate situation, of course, with the loss of his son and then being faced in this and in the heart of this political climate. But the treatment that we're seeing, the response there about jail them, jail them, jail them. And we've even seen, in the case of Mr. Christopher Hunt being arrested for the purpose,
Precisely,
because being part in an activity. It appears that there's this great desire to jail individuals at this point, to make that point. And it's quite often that seems to be something you do see in failed states.
Well, you're absolutely right, and even quasi-failed states. I mean, what you would call, I think Robert Jackson calls quasi-states. He described them as quasi-states. You do have governments, especially when they are starting to lose control of they're losing popular support, and they're losing popular acceptance of what they're doing. They need to use the instruments of coercion and power that are created within the state for political reasons, to go after their political adversaries. So the courts, although the courts are also objective and impartial, they will try to manipulate the courts and the court processes to satisfy themselves. And the most frequently used one is the army, and in countries that have armies, and in our case, the police force, to manipulate the police force to be able to go after the adversaries. In countries where you have intelligence services, they use intelligence services to do so. And in our case, it would probably be, our police force, because it also serves with its criminal intelligence, its special branch and whatever else, to have surveillance over citizens. And people are getting frightened in St. Lucia to even say things over WhatsApp because they believe the government probably listening to their conversations. I mean, when people in a country are starting to get so frightened that government might be tapping their phones and listening to their conversations, these are the steps Obama spoke about, and we can all clearly identify as the growing ingredients of a failed state. And we are seeing in St. Lucia, and you made mention of myself, Christopher Hans, Joachim Henry. I mean, I know it firsthand. I absolutely know it firsthand, where you create a story about somebody, you virtually go after them with all the institutions of the state, hoping that they will break politically, they will break in terms of their whole character and their courage, and that you will get your way, that if somebody is too critical. And we saw it recently, the former Soviet state, the blogger who was on the flight, the Ryanair, flying over Belarus, right. And they brought down the aircraft and took him off it, right. And it's to silence him and to silence opposition. So that's
and we've also seen it in terms of civil society.
Precisely.
So we've seen it where people have spoken out.
The National Church, the National Trust, the priest in Vieux-Fort, the Archbishop.
Father Murphy, Archbishop.
Yeah, we've seen it. Yeah. So these are all elements of autocratic leaders and the rise of authoritarianism in our society. I won't say there's the equivalent of the far right in the U.S. I don't think we have that per se in St. Lucia, but we have the rise of authoritarianism, and we've seen a lot of autocratic tendencies in St. Lucia. And people are frightened of speaking out because the government will victimize you. They'll come
Reading
after
from the
you.
same playbook, you think? Because we've heard that, we've got a tropical Trump, like in Bolsonaro in Brazil.
Yeah.
Boris Johnson has been described as a bit like that. Of course, Donald Trump himself, who's now out, but that sort of strong man type approach being used by the right?
Well, it is, and we're probably going through a circle now where the right-wing ideology is on the decline, and those leaders are using a kind of phony populism, and you're certainly using those tactics to try to remain in power. I mean, we saw what just happened in Israel a few days ago. And we will see it happening. I mean, when your citizens are frightened of the victimization that they will face, they're frightened of their own communications and whatnot, it's a very bad sign for our society.
A politics of fear. I mean, we saw in the last election, Yope,
the
Mwefache, talking about anger, dealing with these guttural type, emotional type things.
Yeah.
Your party now being characterized as being violent. I'm hearing about references to 1979-82, coming up on a very regular Up in the Sky, in the Cloud of GDTV and Sky FM, that narrative, Labour Party people are violent.
Well, I cannot see that. In fact, 7982, most of the voters in this election would not have been born.
I wasn't born yet.
Yeah, you were not born yet. So I don't know where this notion comes from of the party being violent. And certainly we've seen over the last few days some of the videos of the behavior of United Workers' Party supporters trying to run through crowds of Labour Party people. The Labour Party is not violent, and we don't need to be violent in any way whatsoever. We believe that right is on our side. We believe the mood of the people is such that they want the government replaced, and that when the anointed time is announced, the people will show their determination to remove this government. And the only reaction they will get from us is in the ballot boxes when people go out to vote. I mean, a lot of people are very passionate about their politics, and they will. But that's a cultural thing. That's a West Indian thing. I mean, those of us who've lived in other countries, in the European countries, sometimes we are marveled by the low energy of the politics. In the Caribbean, political contests are cultural. They're exciting. They're not supposed to be boring. It's supposed to be a lot of picong and drama and characters, you know, in political life. We've never...
But don't you think that's a little dangerous? And especially not, I mean, that might actually benefit a type like an Alan Chasney, who's very much about marketing and sales and putting out some fancy words and speaking quickly, and that somehow might, you know, impress a not so mature voter out there, as opposed to, let's say, a more quiet Angela Merkel type, you know, very studious, very good at what she does, very good at delivering stuff, but not the charismatic type that'll move a crowd.
Well, I mean, we've always been a society like this, of popular culture, and it's our nature. I mean, it's in our music, our dance, the way we dress, the way we structure our lives. It's not a boring existence. We're not a boring people in this part of the world. And that's what makes us so alluring for persons from other parts of the world. So charismatic people certainly, you know, have a place in our politics and have dominated our politics for the last few decades, ever since the decolonization process started. So that will always be a feature. And I think as societies actually get more modern, they actually have space for more technocratic leaders. When I say modern, in terms of maturing, in terms of the democracy, because you now have a more informed civil society that can weigh issues more rather than just rely on the sweet talk and the drama and character on the platform. So you will see a decline of the charismatic leader over time in terms of the history of our political development. But for now, we still have it. Nobody wants a boring meeting. I mean, this is the Caribbean. You must have some picong. But we're becoming more politically correct, too. So some of the jokes you would give in the past, you cannot make them anymore. Some of the things you would say about people, you cannot say it anymore. You have to have more regard for people's sexuality, for their race, for their looks, their size, whatnot, because that is the maturing of the democracy. So yes, the charlatans like Alan Chasney will be weeded out of our politics eventually, but we still have a long way to go. Social media is really transforming the way politics is conducted.
Right.
I mean, I'm a student of politics. I studied political science, and I've done campaigns in different islands. The last election was my first as a candidate, and I was very heavy on digital campaigning, very heavy. I mean, this election, I mean, everybody is big on digital campaigning.
And even between those two elections, 2016 and 2021, it's changed substantially.
Dramatically.
I mean, the whole Instagram generation is now on. People tell you
Yeah.
that persons who were 25, you know, back then are in a different zone from those who are right then and now. And so even that, I think, is moving very quickly. You have, of course, an Alan Chasney who's dressed up all in black in the Prime Minister's official residence, taking pictures and posing.
Yeah.
And that might actually impress somebody.
Well, I mean, I've always held a view that the digital space was created for entertainment purposes as against political purposes. And the first predisposition of people in that space is to look for entertainment purposes.
But isn't politics becoming entertainment for a lot of people?
Now, that's the point I was going to make. When our politics now become entertainment and it loses its essence, in terms of educating people and informing people, whatnot, then you run that risk. But as somebody who's involved in the digital space, I can see what images attract the attention and reaction from individuals and what people would read but not react to. It doesn't mean paying attention to it, but what they would react and what engages them is more the lifestyle, the entertainment, than the hardcore politics. So which is probably why you'll see him trying to wear his glasses, whatnot. But I think also that when you have been described for what you are, it's very difficult for you now to, you will have to be a real genius to almost like a chameleon to change who you are, because the electorate have a way of making up their minds and moving past you. And I don't think social media will change that. When people have made up their minds about you and they've moved past you, you have to wait for another cycle.
Very interesting, though. Well, Dr. Hilaire, we're due for a break at this point in time, and when we come back, we'll perhaps be delving more into the hot stuff of the
exciting stuff.
and the more exciting stuff. So we'll be back just after this. Welcome back to State of the Nation. I'm your host, Alex George Jr., and of course, we're very pleased to have in studio with us Dr. Ernest Hilaire, the MP, Member of Parliament for Castries South, looking for another term to represent the people of Castries South whenever that election is called. Dr. Hilaire, there have been, as we said, so many different issues, but one which certainly you have come up on of late, I think you have this regular Thursday program discussion online, is the matter of the this whole development started back during the Kenny Anthony administration, a private developer, Mr. Charles Daher, going ahead with this Daher Mall project, which was a Bois d'Orge Hypermart, I think it was called at the time. The project started off, ended up into some difficulties. Of course, it had promised many things: a cinema, supermarket, shops, bowling alley, parking below, and lots and lots of facilities there. But it never was able to be completed. And so certainly by the year 2000, it had already stopped. This administration, well, not this one, perhaps the Stephenson King administration, sometime between 2006 and 2007, got back into
that John Compton. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Well, right. It was still right, and of course up until September, when we saw the passing of Sir John Compton, and then the King administration took over, and then they decided to get into purchasing this property. Now, first, of course, some people may say, well, the Labour Party has sort of done something like that in the past with respect to the Blue Coral building. The former JK building was purchased, redeveloped through the NIC. What's different about this purchase of the Daher Mall?
This purchase as in August 2020 or the original purchase?
The original purchase.
I mean, there's a big difference between that and the Blue Coral. Blue Coral is in the city center. It is the center of all economic activity on Bridge Street, which is our main business, thoroughfare. And in a sense, having a business outlet there is a valuable one. And it is an iconic building in the center of Castries.
Right, the old MNC building.
The whole MNC building, exactly. So having NIPRO, as it is, purchasing it, and having it as an investment is a safe and secure investment. And it's also critical and important to ensure that a building which, like I said, is iconic on Bridge Street is kept and in a sense used as part of our national assets and our national heritage. So having a building right in the middle of Castries is almost a no-brainer, and therefore I think it is very safe. The purchase of the building at Bois d'Orge was a little unusual because, first of all, there were questions about its structural integrity. There were questions as to the sensibility of that economic concept existing right there. And there was always some question as to, was it really worth it? And maybe it's best for it to be in private sector hands. And then you were told that really it's not going to be used for business activity, but government offices would be placed there. And you started to think that, wait. This thing is a huge building, 280,000 square feet. For housing government offices, are we moving the center, the administrative capital of St. Lucia from Castries now to Bois d'Orge to the north? And nobody could really answer the question. You started to wonder, but exactly what's this about? Is this a bailout for somebody? Because to buy this building and say it's going to be completed and used for government offices, Now, there are people who believe government should own property and real estate itself, but there are also people that tell you it is important for the real estate industry that you have private owners, landlords, that rent to government, and government renting is a form of economic activity. And yes, you have to balance between having a huge rental bill, but also allowing the private sector to thrive in that setting. But the size of the building suggested that it can house almost the entire government, infrastructure. 280,000 square feet is a lot of space. And we just could not understand why were you going to move all the government ministries and buildings from Castries to Wadawaj? Where would the parking be? For all the individuals that have the children going to school in the city center, how is it going to work? All the citizens from down the south that come up to Castries now have to take an additional bus to come up to the north. Can you imagine the registry? Can you imagine passport? Can you imagine all government services now?
Well, we were never really told exactly what the ministries were going then to begin with. I think it was just said that there were going to be 18 or so different government agencies.
Yeah, 18 is quite a lot, yeah. So it was substantially different, yeah.
Now, and even with this, of course, the whole market, the whole retail real estate market has shifted quite a bit. I mean, since that point of that mall being constructed in around the late 90s into the early 2000s, you've seen additional investment in the north. Of course, the Baywalk Mall has come on stream. And then there's this whole issue as to whether even retail at this point in time can even continue to grow because of the shifts that have occurred in terms of how people purchase things online and what have you. But let's actually take a listen to what was said and how it was justified by the then Minister for Tourism, Alan M. Shastney, regarding this whole purchase of what was the Daher Mall by a company known as Amazona Properties, a special purpose company that was created by the government. Let's take a listen to this Carmi Joseph clip.
Dr. Kenny Anthony has never shied away from stating his disapproval of the government's decision to purchase the Daher building. He has sounded that protest in Parliament, at press conferences, and at political meetings like the one his party held last week. Now that the building has been purchased through a private company owned by the government, Dr. Anthony is no less vocal about the dire consequences that will follow that decision. This time his message is aimed at the bank that financed the deal.
I want this bank to know that I hope that they cross their T's and dot their I's. Because when you see that loan get into trouble and a Labour government is in office, don't ask the Labour government to honor it. Cross your T's and dot your I's. Because that loan should have gone to the Parliament of St. Lucia, and the Parliament of St. Lucia authorized a company owned by the government of St. Lucia to borrow that money to buy that building.
The tourism minister calls the decision to purchase the building a sound investment for the bank and the government. He says it is a win-win situation for the lending institution and the country.
Is it fair to say that after you invest $30 or $40 million and you fix up the building, that it has a value of $60 million? Our estimates are that it'll be having a greater value. And the bank itself, what would be the rationale for the bank? The building has sat there and nobody has taken it up. The building was free for anybody to take it up. So the bank itself was happy to get this off its books and for it to become now an active asset.
Shastney says Dr. Anthony is playing cheap politics by not supporting the purchase of the building. Furthermore, he says the government has a plan for making the building pay for itself.
The government is also looking at opportunities of maybe selling some of the floors in terms of investors, where they can buy a floor of the building, and that the government then can reduce the substantial part of the loan. All those are being looked at, but those are being looked at in the purview of now there's a separate company. This is not even something that's being run by government. There's a separate company with its own board that's been given the mandate by cabinet in order to make sure the finances on this building work.
Dr. Anthony has called for the loan that would be used to finance purchase of the building to go towards the economic stability of St. Lucians. He says the time is not right to purchase a building he described as derelict.
Save the jobs! Save the jobs! Give people a chance to work. The 33 million you spend on the Hilaire building, you should have taken it and gone build roads, drains, employ people. That's what you should be doing with that. Not to go and buy a derelict building.
Now, Dr. Hilaire, and of course for the benefit of the listeners, that clip is over 10 years old. I think it was around 2011 or maybe even before that. And of course, on the Huskings, Dr. Anthony reasoned, first and foremost, no parliamentary approval for that original loan, which was taken by the government. I think somewhere nearly 33 million or so.
Close to 35 million.
$35 million spent purchasing this property. I believe there was also within that whole deal some repayment to NIC for monies that were owed by the developer on the project, so they had to pay back some contributions which were owed, as well as 10 acres of land in the Union area, but not very usable land at all. Very steep forested land at the back of Union. No parliamentary approval, and that never got dealt with ever.
Not that I know of, no. Not that you said that. It's something that we need to research on. But there was no parliamentary approval.
And it's instructive that this is going on, because right now we're seeing DFCs, design, finance, construct projects which are going on. I'm thinking by this point must be nearly $250 million worth of DFCs that have not gone to Parliament yet, but work is being done.
But
and
the Prime Minister claims that the new Finance Management Act that he brought to Parliament last year, a loan, any repayment that is less than 5 years is not considered a loan.
Oh.
And any repayment, so because the DFC...
So the Cabot loan was not a loan then?
Well, I mean, this was NIC, you know.
Right,
separate.
I mean, I know, but
but in terms of government, he claims that the DFCs will be paid will be paid out by government in less than 5 years.
But isn't that even scarier? Because that means
that's
on that
frightening.
basis that the government has to find somewhere about $50 million per year.
I mean, every quarter.
For repayment of these loans, these projects.
Yeah, and what is even more frightening about it, and the Labour Party government has to review this, it means government can circumvent the provisions of the Constitution, and by just taking loans where you have to repay in less than 5 years and never go to Parliament.
Of Treasury bills which are 90 days or a year, or even some bonds which are less than that.
I think the way it is worded, it suggests any repayment, recurrent repayment that is less than 5 years. So, I mean, if you ask somebody to come and build whatever, and it's going to cost $200 million, and you repay him over 4.5 years, then you don't have to come to Parliament for approval for that, which is madness, really. But of course, all those things will be dealt with in time.
But Dr. Hilaire, you just heard, of course, then Tourism Minister Chasney saying it's only going to cost $30-40 million more,
only,
and the building was free for anybody to take up. But then it's a little contradictory there, because if it was free for everybody to take up and nobody took it, then there's a bit of a question mark. Well, why didn't anybody take it if it was in fact such a good deal to begin with?
Yeah. Well, exactly. The fact is it was there. And those of us remember there was a for sale sign outside the building. Elections was in December 11th, 2006. By December 12th, 2006, the for sale sign was taken down. So there was always the intention that if the government changed, the building would have been purchased. And eventually it was purchased. And it remained unused for 15 years. So the government had this property that it bought for about almost $35 million. And for 15 years almost, it was not used. We end up paying interest payment, loan repayment, from what I was informed, over $45 million on that building, $45 million.
Wait, are you talking about the Labour Party administration that came in afterwards?
And yes, the Labour Party, and even the early part of this government that came in 2016, would have paid almost $45 million.
So originally, somewhere around $35 million for the purchase, that original loan. But at the end of it, with interest payments, to pay it off, you're talking about somewhere around $45 million.
Close to 4, from what I was informed.
So effectively, the government has pumped in $45 million just to purchase this property.
Yes.
Now that's, of course, that's
Yes.
the benchmark there.
Yes.
And then on top of that now, the big question is how much more money would have had to be put in to be able to actually redevelop it?
Well, I mean,
Now-
if you had redeveloped it and it's yours and you can rent out space and get some returns, then there would be some benefit of having done so. But the fact is, it just lay there abandoned for all those years. So this brilliant economic plan that the then Minister of Tourism, Alan Chasney, spoke about, what happened to it?
Right.
Because you heard him that it made brilliant sense and why they were purchasing the building, but nothing happened. Nothing happened. And then Kenny Anthony came back in 2011 with nothing on the table as to what to do with this building. And this huge undertaking is before the Labour Party government, because you've spent $30-odd million to purchase the building. It would probably cost another $20-odd million, $30 million to complete it, and then to find something to do with it. Nothing was done with it.
Now, let's take a listen to what has happened of late, because, of course, the building, the whole property has now been sold.
Yes.
And we found out about that somewhere in one of the Prime Minister's interactions in the media. I think we have that clip right about now from Choice TV's Amani Mathra. Let's take a listen.
Prime Minister Alan Chasney has revealed details of the latest effort to turn the Daher Mall property into an income-generating opportunity. This comes a decade after the last attempt to restore and utilize the abandoned property in Bois-d'Arche. Acquired by the Stephenson King administration through a receiver in 2008, the building was initially slated to serve as an administrative complex housing the offices of 18 government institutions. While renovation and construction works were slated to begin in early 2011 and span an 18-month time period, that attempt to revive the property never came to fruition. Now, the property has been boarded up as investors pursue a new venture.
So what we did is we sold the ground floor. A lot of people aren't familiar here, but we have what's called a condo legislation. So it means you can have a block and parcel number for different floors. So we sold the ground floor. We kept the 2 floors upstairs. The person who bought the ground floor has agreed through a bolt arrangement to outfit the entire building. So he's building commercial space downstairs. We're designing upstairs right now for call centers. So we have met with one of the largest call center companies in the world. And they want to put a major headquarters for the Caribbean here. They want to start with 600 people, which would require 35,000 square feet of space. We have 75,000 square feet of space in that location.
According to the Prime Minister, if this avenue does not prove fruitful, there are other individuals interested in renting the upstairs of the building.
So what would happen is the government will pay rent, I think it's like about $4 a square foot, for 15 years. And at the end of the 15 years, the 2 buildings, the 2 floors come back to the ownership of the government. So we're not having to put out any money, we're not having to borrow any money to be able to do that. And we're going to, even if it's government offices are going to go in there, the average rent for government office space is $5.50. So we would be getting actually at $1.50 cheaper than what we were getting anywhere else. So I'm very excited about seeing that building finally coming into.
So 2 entities will be owning that property then?
Yes.
Okay.
So one is called Amazona, which is wholly owned by the government, and the other one is going to be the other company that bought the ground floor.
In September 2019, the Prime Minister and the Infrastructure Minister noted that the government was in talks with a regional investor to get the property back into use. Chasney has since revealed the investor behind the undertaking.
Yeah, you want to tell us the other company?
Sure, it's Blue Waters. Okay. Right, so they're actually, I'm very excited about the confidence they're showing in St. Lucia. They're in the process of building a new facility in Gros Islet, in Massad. They're the ones who also bought Pope Hill. And they have put in plans to do a hotel, office space, and also an apartment development at that location. So that roundabout, your favorite roundabout, is in collusion with them, so that we can actually create an off of the roundabout to get into that development.
The Daher Mall property has been abandoned for well over a decade after the original plans for it to become the Bois-d'Arche Hypermart failed. Now it stands dilapidated, and it is unclear just how much renovation work will be required to ensure that the property is usable. For Choice News Now, Amani Mathre reporting.
So, Dr. Hilaire, let's try to start unpacking some of this, what was said by the Prime Minister, because a lot of interesting things were said. First, he was suggesting that the Condominium Act of St. Lucia was applied to allow for the part of the building to be sold to a developer. He says that the part was just the ground floor was sold to the developer, and the government still owns the other 2 floors. That's the explanation that was given by the Prime Minister. Is that correct?
Well, not entirely. And in fact, that's where the Prime Minister, in typical style, misleads. The truth is, we are going to, he says we're going to get a second and third floor owned by the government of St. Lucia. That is not true. The second and third portions of the second and third floor, totaling 78,400 square feet, is being leased to the government of St. Lucia. It's been leased to the government of St. Lucia. After 15 years of paying the lease, we will now be the rightful owners. Ownership will be transferred to us. But for now, the transfer of ownership, the shows of both the land and the buildings, it is owned by one entity right now, the registered documents.
Right. So let's just have a quick look at that for the benefit of persons who are at home. If you could just go to screen very quickly. Right. So this is a document right here, Land Registration Act. Well, basically just says transfer of land by Amazona Properties Limited, which is government owned, to Orange Grove Plaza Limited, right? And it, of course, gives you the registration, Grosley 1253B, parcel number 888 for US $5 million or EC $13,584,500, executed this day, 26th day of March 2020, which was last year. Over a year ago, and of course it gives the before Mark Mirage, Notary Royal, and between Amazona Properties Limited and Orange Grove Plaza. And of course, in the instance of Amazona Properties being represented by Director Francis Denbo and Benjamin Emmanuel, the Cabinet Secretary, representing there and as the vendor, and of course Blue Investments Limited, which is the reference, I suppose, to Blue Waters there. And as well, of course, being represented by Secretary Mr. Esper and the PIF Corporate Services as the, which is also in there somewhere. But the point is, building was sold, the entire property was sold for $13.6 million. Now that's very important because as well, just last night, the Prime Minister's attaché, Norbert Williams, was saying that the building was sold for $30 million. But this is clearly saying that this was sold for 13.
He probably meant we lost 30 million.
Well, right. So we actually lost in the sale because we effectively paid 45 or 45, 46, and we end up now selling the building for 13.
So he probably meant that we lost 30 million, not that we sold it for 30 million. Because, I mean, the document is there. It's a public document. You can see that it was sold for $5 million US, which is 13.6 million EC. And since it was purchased in 2006, 2007, we have probably put in about $45 million in that property. So in effect, we have lost.
So effectively, just by the sale of the property, the government has already lost
$30 million.
$30 million on this deal.
On that.
This brilliant deal.
Transactional loss. Because if you then say what is the market value, it might be slightly different. In terms of land and buildings, whatnot. But in transactional value, we would have lost $30 million.
Right. So that takes us up to that point. Now, in addition to that, we heard from the Prime Minister speaking about this whole arrangement where the government has 75,000 square feet.
Now, it's actually 78,400.
78,400. Now, just for the benefit of those, again, who are at home, if we could just go to screen. If we go to the north of St. Lucia and we can zoom in and we can see the property in question, right? This is Bois de Wage, and this is the property right here, right? And again, we can just very quickly work out that the footprint of that building is almost 90,000 square feet, as you can see here, right?
The front building.
Right, the footprint of the entire, what's on the ground, right?
Okay, yeah.
And then you got 3 levels up. So
Yes,
90 by 3, roughly 270,000, which is what you were saying, 280,000.
280,000.
Right.
Yeah.
So what is actually being leased by the government is not the full building,
No, the
but
front
it's
building.
just the front part
Second and third floor.
and the second and third floor. So roughly, again, this shows just about 35,000. So it comes up to about 70,000. You said it's exactly 78,400. So out of that, now the Prime Minister mentioned something about call centers.
Yeah.
Is it that the call centers are getting another section within that building? Because it's clearly there's a lot of other space which has not really been clarified as to what is going to be done on the second and third floors at the back or, wherever else. But so the call centers part he's referring to, you think, is within the government share?
Well, I mean,
of
that's
that
worried because he
75,000.
seemed to suggest that we are going to be bringing in a call center. He's already in negotiation with them. He cannot be in negotiation with a call center about the rest of the building owned by somebody else. So one has to assume if he's in negotiation with a call center to come in and occupy the space, then it has to do the space that he owns. Certainly can't be some other space. But you remember with Ojo Labs, the government provided a refurbished factory shell. The government paid for utilities, including electricity, water, internet, and the government paid the salaries of the staff there for almost 18 months. So he's already established a business model where he will pay the rent or the cost of housing the business, as well as paying the recurrent expenditure for a period of time. So it's not inconceivable that when he says he will be the owner of the second and third floor, which is not right. He is actually leasing the second and third floor. It's not his, and I want us to deal with this. Because the most frightening part of this lease agreement is a clause that deals with this. So we would want to believe that, he is already finding space for the call centers and the a la Ojo Labs model. And therefore, when we will be renting or leasing this property for 15 years at $313,000 a month, which is about 3.7 million a year for 15 years, it is for those purposes. He's not given it a lot of details, but he seemed to be suggesting that he's in negotiation with a call center to be housed at that facility.
Right. But let's just forget about the call center because the call center may never come.
Yeah, but it's worrying for me.
We don't even know that.
Because for government to be subsidizing call centers at such a high rate.
Right. Well, we don't even know because again, it might be that it's subsidized. We don't really know what the arrangement is. But it's questionable.
Yeah.
And even so, perhaps there's no agreement there as well. But let's just take a look at this lease agreement, though, which is also available.
Yeah.
And again, just for the benefit of those at home, this is a lease agreement between Orange Grove Plaza Limited and the government of St. Lucia now.
Yeah.
So government of St. Lucia is now engaging the same individuals who they sold the land to. And again, all that, it says it very clearly, all that 78,406 square feet comprising the first and second floors, remember there's ground, first and second, right, of the building known as Amazona Building and situated at at Bois de Wage in the registration quarter of Grosley and registered in the land registry as block and parcel 1253B number 888. So that's the same thing, the same building, we just have established that. Right, and so, of course, as you can see, it has been signed by the Registrar of Lands, and this was dated the 7th of April, 2021.
Yeah.
So as of the 7th of April, we have entered into a lease agreement with this developer for those areas. And as you said, if we could just maybe skip the text a little bit, I think at the bottom, it actually shows the leased area.
Yeah.
Right? So as you can see here in black, this is the leased area in black. Now the building extends. There are 3 sections of the building. There's a whole section at the back, which is not included in the lease, and there's a section on where you see building number 3, and that's to the right of your screen, right? Which is where the Prime Minister says the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court is going to be housed, which is that's a completely separate lease. That's what he says.
Yes, yes.
Of course, the court may decide
it's not going there.
It's not going there at all.
Yeah.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about now the lease itself, because you're saying we effectively are tying ourselves to about 15 or 16 and a half years.
Yeah, well, 15 years, 16 and a half years, but a year and a half, which is 18 months, is the period of refurbishment.
And construction. So there's a grace period of a year, of 18 months.
18 months, yeah.
Prior to, so the assumption of...
The commencement date is March, and the completion date is 18 months later, which would be up to August next year. And then you have the rental commencement date starting 1 month after the completion date.
Okay.
So the rental commencement date actually starts the 1st of September, I think it is, or October next year. So what they have done is we have already commenced the lease from March, but they're going to give us a moratorium on rental until next year. So
because the building has to be refurbished.
It has to be, yes. So we've already started the lease. I mean, I couldn't understand why it's done this way, but there must be some reason why they've done it this way.
Now, in terms of payment, you're not just paying for the floor space, which is, I think, indicated.
But just before you go on that, I would want you to try to explain to me, why would we not have commenced the lease of the 2 floors from the rental commencement day, which is next year?
Right.
Why did it have to be done immediately? So in effect, government has started leasing 2 floors that have not been refurbished yet, but there's a moratorium on paying the rent. Why did they find it necessary to have the lease commence now?
Well, I guess it's because they had to tie in, the developer has to tie in his ability to gain back the monies. I think that's the idea.
But we're not paying the rent.
We're not paying the rent, but then you still,
But we are tied in into the agreement.
But you're tied in for a full period of time. Kind of like, I suppose, a build, own, lease transfer type arrangement, sort of. But we speak about that. But what are we saying right now? You're paying your $4 per square foot.
Yeah.
Right. So you're paying $4 per square foot. I just want to get a calculator out here.
Yeah, that's 313,000.
We said that the total
at 78,400.
It was all that 78,406.
Yeah, by $4 a square foot.
By $4 a square foot. That's per month, right? So that's $313,624 per month. But then there's also another 10% charge, a maintenance fee.
There are a number of services that will be provided, maintaining the common areas, maintaining the grounds, and all those things. You have to pay your portion of that. So since you have 78,406 square feet, your portion of that cost would be 78,406 over 280,000 square feet. So that's the portion. That'll be your portion of that common services cost.
Right.
And then there is maintenance costs.
Right.
And you have to pay the cost for utilities, water, all those things.
Well, I'm not even going there yet, but just the...
No, that's part of it. And then you
maintenance.
Pay the maintenance costs, and then you pay 10% management fee. Now that 10% management fee is 10% of the maintenance cost. So if the maintenance cost for the building is $500,000 for the year, you pay your portion of that, plus you pay 10% of the $500,000.
Okay.
Which is the management fee.
Now, there's no way that we know what the maintenance cost is going to be.
No, you have no idea.
So we just have to kind of estimate.
You just have to estimate. So you have the common services costs, you have the maintenance costs, and the utilities costs, and then 10% of the maintenance cost as a management fee that you have to pay. Now, you have to pay for all the staff that's involved in the maintenance of the building, the engineers, the groundsmen, all those things. You too have to make your contribution towards that cost. So your rental of $313,000 per month, it's a lot more than that.
Right, so it's $313,000 times a factor
Yes,
which
yes,
is this
yes. Which is about
maintenance.
1/4. We'll be paying about 1/4 of the total cost.
Okay.
Because
so,
78,400 over 280,000 is about 23%, somewhere around there. Yeah.
So basically, right. So let's just stick with this. I'm just going to use a factor of 10%, right? Increasing in that. So that's roughly about 345,000 per month. So it's times 12 times 15. So you're speaking about $62 million over the next 15 years that we've committed ourselves to repaying. Could be more,
Yeah, a lot
depending
more.
on
No, a lot
whether
more.
and of course that is no VAT. So that's just the government.
And then you have to add VAT.
I'm not including VAT
Yeah,
because you know there'll be people who say, well, that's going back to government. But I'm just talking about that aspect.
Yeah.
You know, but that's a substantial amount of money to be tying in at this point in time.
It is. And I mean, you've been very generous, huh?
Very, I know, very generous.
It's a lot more than that. Because you've in effect added what, about 40,000 more a month?
Right, yeah.
Now, which is 10%. It will be more than that. Your utilities alone will be $40,000 more a month.
Right.
Electricity, air condition, water, and those things.
Right.
Alone will be more than that.
Dr. Hilaire, I just want to show you a graph, and this is of Government of St. Lucia rental payments per annum between 2008, 2009, and 2000 up until the last year gone, up until March 31st, 2021. And as you can see, over the past 5 years, we've seen an incredible rise in that figure. I mean, I've color-coded it just for the benefit of those out there. In yellow, that period within the Alan Chastney administration. And we're now looking at over $70 million on annual payments of government for rent at this point in time. That's a very, very concerning rate of increase. And even before that 2020, 2021, it was increasing. It was clearly way out of control.
70 million a year. And you're going to add another 4 million just from this, another 4 million. And again, that's why it raises the question of why did the government believe this is prudent at this point? Why should we do this? Why do we have to do it? And I wanted to make a point to you that according to, look at clause 2.1, which you can bring up, they have agreed to offer moratorium on rent until the rental commencement date, which is the beginning of September, 1st of September, I think, next year. But the term of the agreement, which is the term of rental of the lease for 15 years, cannot expire until the landlords, the persons who we sold the building to, have paid off all the outstanding debts to financial institutions. So look at 2.1.
2.1, this is at the request of the tenant.
Yeah.
The landlord hereby leases and demises unto the tenant all the lease premises from the commencement date with a moratorium on rent from the commencement date until the rent commencement date for the term provided that the term shall not expire until all monies due and owing by the landlord to Republic Bank EC Limited or such other financier has been fully repaid. So basically, they don't release that until they've paid their loans.
Their loans. Now, I mean, somebody must tell us under what conditions can we continue to accept responsibility in case they are not servicing their loans? If for whatever reason they do not rent the rest of the building and there's a lot of empty space, because they have a business model.
Right.
They purchase it for X amount, refurbish for X amount, monthly expenditure of X amount, and monthly repayment to the bank based on revenue earned would be X amount.
Yeah. So in other words, government is giving them a sort of a bly, let's call it that, of about 25 to 30% of the floor space.
Yeah.
Guaranteed. But they still have to now go out, of course, and fill out the other 70% of the floor space.
Yes.
And if they're not very successful with doing that,
they cannot service their loan.
They may not be able to service their loan, or perhaps the cost of the improvements to the building may be more than what they originally expected, and the loan amount might go up, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
So you might actually be in this arrangement for more than even the 15 years.
Precisely. It means we cannot end the lease and we cannot become the true owners of the floors that the Prime Minister spoke about until the company that bought the building and is refurbishing the building has paid off all their monies to financial institutions.
Dr. Hilaire, we're way overdue for a break at this point in time. It is very, very concerning, no doubt, and I'm sure lots of people listening at home, for them, there will be quite a revelation that you're providing tonight. But we're due for a break, so we'll be right back after this. Welcome back to State of the Nation. We're chatting with the MP before that, in fact, the first deputy political leader of the St. Lucia Labour Party and MP for Castries South, Dr. Ernest Hilaire. Dr. Hilaire, I mean, we've just been speaking about this whole situation with this Daher Mall. The Prime Minister has sold himself, the United Workers' Party has sold him as somebody with a business mindset, that he's going to run the country like a business. This situation that we're seeing right about now, we've lost $30 million on the transaction of the sale of this property after purchasing it under former United Workers' Party government. $30 million lost there. And now getting into a deal which is locking you into over $60 million conservatively in rental payments for the next 15 years.
Yeah.
So effectively, we're talking about a $100 million deal, so to speak, or monies that have to be found by the country to repay this entire situation, this Daher Mall situation.
I mean, this is how grave it is. And it's interesting you started off by saying that the Prime Minister come businessman who was going to run this country like a business, like a CEO. And he's been a total failure as a CEO. I mean, you can't point to me one project, one brilliant business-minded economic project that the Prime Minister has undertaken. And this again just reflects that it is business, but not business for the people. So you're running the country as a business.
Maybe your own business.
But it is not business for the people, not for the shareholders, the people. It's business for some other interest. Because at the end of the day, like you said, we virtually lost $30 million on the sale of the building from what you would have spent over the 14 years or so. And now you entered into an arrangement where by lease payments alone, you'd be probably spending almost $60 million, which is $90 million. And then there is a clause that virtually says that period of time in which you have to lease to get ownership is not even determined because it's dependent on the landlord, the person who bought the building and refurbishing it, has to pay off their loans. Now, what kind of business is this for the people of St. Lucia? This is not about the people of St. Lucia. This is a harebrained scheme, if one has to say it in raw terms, that does not benefit and interest the people of St. Lucia on the share appearance of it. When you just look at the numbers, you cannot be convinced that this is about the people of St. Lucia.
We're hearing a supermarket is going down on the ground level. Any idea what supermarket that may be?
Well, I heard there is going to be a supermarket. I mean, there is obviously signs, if you look around, of certain interests, expanding the supermarket business and being a competitor to Massey. So, yes, you're hearing talk that there is going to be a supermarket, on the ground floor, whatnot. But, you never know with this government.
Of course, this is just one matter that we're looking at right about now, Dr. Hilaire, and I mean, the time is flying by. A lot of people have now been consumed by what we're hearing about the whole Padro matter. Now, I mean, it's not something that has come out and is anything new because, in a way, we've been talking about this whole Padro thing since 2019. But, in fact, I understand the leader of the opposition, in fact, sort of preempted it by suggestions that he made on a political platform as far back as 2017. Let's take a look at this clip where we're being asked whether Philip J. Pierre is a bit of a gade in this one. Let's take a listen.
I want to tell you a travesty of the United Workers' Party. In January 2016, when we were in government, the Ministry of Infrastructure wrote a letter to the Caribbean Development Bank on the 12th of January 2016. That letter was sent to the bank to replace all the lights, 21 1,500 of these high energy lights in the country. We wrote a letter to the bank and we said to the bank, that is causing a drain on our resources. That is not helping our carbon footprint. That is causing the government $11 million a year to pay for these street lamps. And the president of the CDB recommended to the board of directors for a loan of US $11.6 million and a loan to Lucilec of $1.146 million and a grant to the government of US $30,000 from the Resources for Climate Action and Support of the CDB. The CDB said that that project was so good, it was such a well-conceived project, that they would waive some of the requirements. They said, instead of having us to fund 20%, they said they would fund 90% and we'd only have to fund 10% because of the quality of that project. But the CDB said that Lucilec will have to implement the project. Lucilec will have to implement the project. So you know, Lucilec implementing, that means government ministers not involved. Fresh start, there can't be no fresh start. There can't be any direct award. There can't be any friends and family. You know what these guys did? These guys cancelled the loan. They cancelled the loan with the CDB and they said that they will give the job to somebody in the private sector. You believe a government that is serious would cancel such a loan that would save the country 58% of $11.5 million per year. So wait and see, just wait and see who will get the contract to replace the lights in the country. The contract will be given to a friend, to family.
A charge on the consolidated fund must receive a parliamentary guarantee. On the basis of that letter, it is safe for me to say that it appears Guy is the whole of Parliament. Because if Guy Joseph can guarantee $167 million for a company that he intends to contract with, then he's the whole of Parliament. But let me tell you who Pajot is. Pajot is a local company that was formed in 2015. Good, you all see it there? Pajot's Limited, company number 2015C118. If a company needs a letter that is essentially addressed to anybody who has money to lend them, whether it's the Chinese, the Taiwanese, or even the devil, it means that that company is not worth a grain of salt. Folks, Pajot Limited, although having a letter to go around to source $167,400,000, Pajot share capital last year, when they file, its share capital c'est tout l'argent ini, was, you will not believe, $1,000. It's right there. You pass at the mamati, Check amount of stated capital. If you look at the third column on your screen from your left, amount of stated capital, $1,000. $1,000. But they are given a letter. They are given a letter to raise $167 million. Davis Max Johannes. Aren't you the brother of Bertram Johannes? Bertram Johannes, aren't you the one used to work by Caribbean Metals? Oh, okay, I'm not sure. I'm asking. Bertram Johannes, are you not the one responsible for giving out contracts on behalf of Guy Joseph in both Castries South and Castries Southeast? Don't you control all those CDP projects? In fact, I even have a couple of contracts, Bertram Johannes, that persons, I have the documents. They said, you give them the contracts. So folks, Bertram Johannes, the brother of David Johannes, Mark Johannes, who's the registered director of Pajo Limited, is Guy's right-hand man. If I lie, say I lie. 167 million given to company. Company, Davis Max Johannes, Kenan Johannes. Davis Max is brother to Bertram Johannes. Bertram Johannes is Guy's right-hand man who gives all the CDP contracts in Castries South and Castries Southeast. Connect the dots.
What I know is how to use money to gain wealth.
Well, very extensive clip, Dr. Hilaire, about this entire situation of Pajo Limited and Mr. Guy Joseph, originally denying, of course, any type of involvement in this. Now, we've been trying to figure out who is Pajo for quite some time. And just very quickly to go on screen, if you could just go to screen, please. That's the most I've found of Pajo, by the way. There's a building somewhere in Rayleigh Park with this on it. It says Pajo. But beyond that, we haven't been able to find very much about Pajo. So tell us a little bit about, where is this all coming from? Because there was an existing arrangement. The government got an approved loan from the CDB. It was approved, so much so that I think the Minister of Infrastructure, Stevenson King, even went to the Caribbean Renewable Energy Forum in October of 2016, saying that the government was going ahead with this LED street lighting project. It was touted as being one of the best in the Caribbean, so much so that it was used as a template for other projects in other countries. And then all of that just seems to get quashed. And then enters Pajo. So where does Pajo fit in all this?
Well, I think Richard probably covered it in his explanation, that Pajo is a particular individual, Max Johannes, and another Johannes, who is brother to Big Daddy, Bertram Johannes.
Who's running against you?
Who's running against me.
Okay.
Who is, certainly from the explanation given, Guy Joseph's right-hand man in terms of handling CDP contracts for him. So there's a nexus between Johannes and Guy Joseph. You mentioned that there was already funding for the lighting project, but also in the letter, which the Pajoa letter, reference is made to the St. Jude Hospital.
Yeah. Let's put the letter up on screen, please.
Yeah. And you'd recall that under Kenny Anthony, a loan had been sourced from the Taiwanese, the Exim Bank, half of which had been disbursed, and there was monies available to complete St. Jude as designed and been built. So there you have enough money to finish St. Jude, or at least to complete the structure in most parts. and money approved by the CDB for the lighting project. But Philip J. Pierre had already warned that the CDB had said Lucilec had to handle the lighting project, and that if Lucilec is handling it, ministers are not involved.
Now that's very obvious because the lights are owned by Lucilec. They've been owned by Lucilec in the past. The infrastructure is owned by Lucilec, and it's effectively a service that is being provided by Lucilec to the government of St. Lucia as every other person who's a client of Lucilec.
Exactly. So from the letters, we've seen a picture emerging which seems to suggest that Guy Joseph has decided that he's not going with CDB anymore, for whatever reason, that he's going to raise his own monies for that to be done differently. And seems to have also decided that there need to be more money for St. Jude Hospital. And those two projects would total 162 million EC dollars on his own. And he is creating the avenue for that money to be sourced to finish those two projects for which monies have already been secured.
Dr. Hilaire, let's just go back to the letter, because this is the first thing that surfaced, this November 12, 2018 letter. It's on the Government of St. Lucia letterhead. Ministry of Economic Development, Housing, Urban Renewal, Transport and Civil Aviation, Communications, and this subject should be addressed to Honorable Guy Joseph, right? And of course, Finance Administrative Center. First and foremost, to whom it may concern is a very interesting situation. But let's just go through the letter very quickly. Dear Sir, Madam, please be informed that the government of St. Lucia is currently engaged in discussions with Padros Limited and Associates about the funding the street lighting project and the St. Jude Hospital project in St. Lucia. Upon submission of proof of funding to execute the above-mentioned projects, the government of St. Lucia has agreed to enter into a contractual agreement with Padros Limited and Associates. I want to just stop there. Because it's saying that the government of St. Lucia has agreed to enter into a contractual agreement with Padros Limited and Associates.
I mean, the only way the minister can rightfully see that is if, in fact, Cabinet had decided that, and there is a Cabinet conclusion to that effect. So he's either misrepresenting the government of St. Lucia, in addition to the fact that he has no authority to write such a letter, but he's misrepresenting. He is claiming that the government of St. Lucia, which is in effect Cabinet in this instance, has decided that. For a minister to be telling entities, financial institutions, that the government of St. Lucia has already taken a decision to enter into contractual relationships with Padua. I mean,
so there should therefore be some, how did that happen therefore? Because there would have been some sort of agreement with it's a contractual agreement.
Yes, with Padua. That, in other words, Cabinet says once there can be proof of, read the first line.
Upon a submission of proof of funding to execute the above-mentioned projects, the government of St. Lucia has agreed to enter into a contractual agreement with Padua. So upon submission of proof of funding.
In other words, Cabinet has already decided that once Padua can show that it has been able to source the money, government will enter into a contract with Padua. I'm looking forward to seeing the Cabinet conclusion that says that. Because it means every minister
should know about this.
Should know about that and is guilty of what has taken place.
Just to finish it, the government is also committed to repaying the loan of US $62 million at a 3.59% interest rate over a 15-year period once the projects are successfully completed. Please be aware that Padros Limited and Associates are permitted to use this letter on a to whom it may concern basis for suitable financial institutions that would be able to provide the requisite financing for those prestigious projects. And of course, signed, yours sincerely, Honorable Guy Joseph.
So now, it goes further. It says that Cabinet has already agreed the terms
so interest rate, repayment
so
period,
Cabinet has
amount.
Exactly. Cabinet has already approved the repayment terms, the broad, high-level repayment terms for the monies that are needed. So one, Cabinet has already decided that once Padua can show that it has sourced the money, it will enter into a contract with it. And secondly, these are the terms and conditions that Cabinet has already approved.
Now, Dr. Hilaire, there are people out there, United Workers' Party supporters, the Bowtie men, Minerva Ward types are going out there saying that's stale news. This is nothing new that has already been answered already. Now, from what I recall of what was said in the past, Mr. Joseph was not committed to saying that that was his signature.
Yeah.
In fact, he gave the impression...
seemed to suggest that,
In fact, I think we have a clip. Let's just play that clip, please, of Mr. Guy Joseph denying, well, pretty much saying that it wasn't his signature, and then, in fact, eventually admitting it in the House.
I cannot verify where this letter came from. It bears my signature, as I see, of a picture of something on the internet. There's so much happening.
When I spoke to the minister, he's indicated that there is no letter that he has in his office with his signature that pertains to that.
Mr. Speaker, I am going to say again, I signed for Joe a letter. I am going to say again, I signed for Joe a letter. I signed for Joe a letter, but I didn't sign for a vehicle that was belonging to the state. I signed for Joe a letter.
So in the beginning, denial, it wasn't his signature, pretty much he's saying. He never saw it. There's no letter in the ministry that... And the Prime Minister is actually saying that he was told by the minister that there was no such letter.
And the Prime Minister promised an investigation into it. Maybe he should release the report on the investigation.
But clearly, and in fact, in addition to that, the Prime Minister also said that he couldn't understand what this was about because those projects that were being referred to were already sourced. Funding was already sourced from other projects.
So the Prime Minister, in effect, is now saying Cabinet doesn't know that because he's the chairman of Cabinet. And if he's saying no letter, I mean, it cannot be because there's already money for those projects. He's saying that I don't
mean to be facetious, but is this a sort of situation where we have two prime ministers in the country right now?
Of course it's two prime.
One person is doing one thing and another person is doing another thing. And there's no coordination and one has his own agenda and another one has another agenda?
Or the Prime Minister is deflecting. He's trying to suggest, that this is not the fake letter theory. In other words, Guy Joseph started off saying, almost as if he can't verify his signature. You know if you sign a letter or not. And then the Prime Minister is saying, almost suggesting, why would that be true? Because there's already money for those projects. So almost seeming to reinforce what Guy Joseph was saying.
Right.
But doing it in a subtle way. That I spoke to the minister, he said there is no such letter in his possession, which is clearly a lie. And then secondly to say, why would there even be such a letter? Because we have already sourced the monies for that. So he's reinforcing what Guy Joseph is saying. There's a conspiracy. They both complicit in the act.
Right. Now, of course, since then, because this was the story that you were saying, oh, this has been forgotten. This was 2019 story. The minister says that he didn't sign it. So people just took his word for it, sort of, and then, everything was normal. But of course, we've now seen a whole new paper trail. And we're going to get to that paper trail when we come back because we're due for a break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to State of the Nation, where we're trying to unpack and unravel many different issues, all sort of related because they all deal with money, that's for sure. And some people are out there talking about father, son, and money ghost or cookie, whatever ghost, or lots of different terminologies are being used to describe the current environment. Now, Dr. Hilaire, we're seeing this letter, and some people have been, of course, the United Workers' Party has thrown back sometimes the Robert Ainsworth letter. The Labour Party has said, but this is just a letter of comfort that government is giving to a prospective investor. Is this merely a letter of comfort to a prospective investor?
Well, I mean, it is not. So, for example, if you're an investor and you're discussing in St. Lucia the construction of a hotel, and you want to go to your bank to get the monies, and the bank says, how do I know that you're building a hotel? You'll ask the government, can you give me a letter of comfort? And the letter would say basically that you are in discussions with the country. If the government has sanctioned to construct a hotel, discussions are advanced, blah, 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 and whatever assistance given to you will be appreciated, whatnot.
So in other words, it would say, well, okay, this person will be eligible for certain things under the tourism stimulus.
Precisely, yes. It would give those details because the bank might ask, you might look at the business plan of the investor and says, well, your business plan is predicated upon you getting X, Y, and Z. How do we know you'll get it for sure? So the comfort letter will say that, you will qualify for X, Y, and Z. So the bank, in reviewing your business plan, can see that your assumptions are in fact grounded in an understanding that you will get those things. But this is different. This is a letter where someone is going to raise monies for projects for which monies have already been sourced.
Right.
The Prime Minister himself said it, that we already have money for those projects. You cannot give a comfort letter to someone to go and raise money for projects that are already financed.
Right. Now, one of the projects is actually under Mr. Joseph's portfolio. That is the St. Jude Hospital project. The other one actually is not under his portfolio, from my understanding. That's actually under the Ministry of Infrastructure, which is perhaps why Minister Stevenson King went out there and said that this project was going on, only to later find out that the project was cancelled now. But Mr. Guy Joseph, however, is the government representative on the CDB board. So I'm not sure, as to what point this entire loan got cancelled and who took the decision to cancel the loan.
Precisely.
That is also something that needs to be clarified.
So, I mean, it is not comfort because they're very aware what they're doing. They're raising monies for projects that have been financed, but they intend to cancel the existing financing to get their own line of financing. So it is misrepresentation.
And we don't even know exactly how much is for the street lighting project, how much is for the St. Jude Hospital project. It's all lumped up together, 168 million EC dollars.
Precisely. And more than that, it is making statements which we've now have reason to believe may not even be true. Because in a letter of comfort, you might say that the person would qualify under existing legislation for X, Y, and Z. That's a fact.
Right.
That's a fact. Surely, if government has already agreed, it will enter into a contract with Pajua. If it's already agreed, these are the terms and conditions, where is the proof of it? Surely, when you tell someone they would qualify for incentives under the Incentive Act, anybody can go and, see for themselves. If you, for an investor, you said, we have signed an MOU with the person for the construction, the person can share the MOU. Can Pajua share any cabinet conclusion showing that government has already agreed to those things?
Some people are also suggesting that this is just the government, and I think Mr. Joseph was trying to say so on Monday on his program, that this is just the government assisting an investor. Now, I just thought that was a little interesting because this is more than just, this is the government giving a certain guarantee that it's going to be providing, that's going to enter into this sort of contract or has entered into a contract with this company to provide services. So it's not really an investor. It's not somebody coming in and saying that they're building a hotel or building.
It's not an investor.
This is actually government paying out or would have to pay out at some point, government contracting debt.
Precisely. This is an intermediary. This is like a broker, a financial broker. I don't know that you give comfort letters to a financial broker. I mean, again, trying to reflect on.
And of course, and all this against the backdrop that the government had an approved loan from a reputable, very well-known, established...
For both projects.
For both projects.
For both projects.
Yes.
For both projects.
Yeah.
For both projects. And the thing also about Pajua is that Pajua is not any established financial intermediary institution or finance. It's not. Pajua is not. I mean, if you heard some other institution in St. Lucia or even regionally, you can say, yeah, this is a reputable institution. Nobody ever heard of Pajua. And then when you do the background search on Pajua, who owns it, the due diligence on the person who owns it and operates it, and the association.
And there's almost no doubt that there's a very clear connection between Mr. Guy Joseph and Pajua.
Absolutely not.
And certainly in terms of, even from his family perspective. And
exactly. And listening to Richard, and I mean, you can see every step that there is a connection, to the point where he even made him he's a candidate. One of the Johannes is a candidate for Castries South now.
Right. Now, up until that point, maybe before that, there were still some people who were saying, well, the man has said it's not his signature, it's not a real letter. But since then, we've now seen a slew of other letters now, which are implicating and creating a paper trail. And
just want to have more to come.
Maybe more to come. And let's just have a look at that as well. This letter here is on a Padros Limited letterhead. It says Mr. Maximilus Johannes, Rodney Bay. We showed you the house earlier on, the picture of Padjo, Grosley, and whatnot. January 24th, 2019, it's addressed to Mr. Hazley Wong of Trinidad. Dear Mr. Wong, kindly use this letter as confirmation from Padros Limited in appointing you as our resource representative to source funding for the government of St. Lucia. And this is what is interesting here, to source funding for the government of St. Lucia for the following projects costing $62 million US. St. Jude Hospital, 1, St. Jude Hospital, 2, street lighting. We take this opportunity to thank you for your kind assistance and wish you every success in your future endeavors. And it's signed by Maximilus Johannes, Managing Director. Now, that again is very interesting because it is suggesting that, look, this is the same project as being referenced, the same 2 projects, same amount, government of St. Lucia, sourcing funding for government of St. Lucia, and he's appointing Mr. Wong as a sort of an intermediary, assuming within Trinidad for that purpose. So let's go to the second letter that we have seen recently. And this one is, in fact, a letter on an Answer Merchant Bank Limited letterhead dated 18th of February 2020. So this is last year, right? Honorable Guy Joseph, Minister of Economic Development, Housing and Urban Renewal, Transport and Civil Aviation, is addressed, Dear Honorable Minister Joseph, Padros Limited, Answer Merchant Bank Limited, AMBL, is pleased to confirm its ability and willingness to assist our client, Padros Limited, with financing to meet its funding needs associated with LED street lighting project in St. Lucia. Now, in this instance, we're seeing that St. Jude Hospital has fallen off. It's just the street lighting project. We confirm that we are currently undergoing the evaluation process, which is in an advanced stage with a view to providing a risk-approved financing offer. Please note that this letter does not constitute a binding offer of financing and is issued in the strictest of confidence for discussion purposes only. A binding commitment to provide financing is subject to the completion of negotiations regarding the terms and conditions of the financing package, as well as due diligence on the project. Please do not hesitate to contact the undersigned. Answer, yours faithfully, Answer Merchant Bank Limited, Gregory N. Hill, Managing Director. Now, of course, this is coming from a fairly reputable financial institution, very well known in Trinidad and Tobago, part of, I believe, the Answer Macau group and what have you. And of course, the gentleman there is still the managing director. So of course, here's a bank saying, well, and the interesting thing is that this gentleman is writing to the Minister Guy Joseph, regarding the very same project, which he said he didn't seem to know anything about, and the letter was not actually a real letter.
Yeah. I mean, it just proved that he was misleading the public and misleading Parliament when he spoke about it. Because there you have, and remember, his original letter to whom it may concern says that correspondence to the matter should be addressed to the minister. So, of course, they're now responding to the minister because they obviously would have given the letter to the bank to show, look, the government essentially has agreed they will contract us, and the government has agreed these are the terms and conditions. So the bank is now saying, look, we are prepared to provide the money. Now, this is where it gets frightening because a reputable financial institution is actually prepared to make monies available to the government of St. Lucia because a minister seemed to have gone on a solo drive. If it's not solo, then every member of cabinet must be held accountable for it. How it is that cabinet, this cabinet of ministers we have in St. Lucia, how it is that they could approve a minister going and source funding for 2 projects that monies have already been sourced. So, I mean, if he did not go solo with his small cabal, then surely the ministers in cabinet should have asked, why are you sourcing funding for projects you already have monies? Plain and simple.
Dr. Hilaire, it seems that this is just one of a pattern of projects and similar types of approaches that this current administration has engaged in. Coming into office, project existing, financing available for the project is stopped. We think of course, St. Jude Hospital. Classic situation like that. loan was available. Of course, I remember that had always been the problem at St. Jude Hospital, the financing issue. The loan was actually available. Monies had been disbursed. Monies to complete the project. 6 months away from completion. And Mr. Joseph, again, is the one in question, stops the project, then starts a whole series of actions to justify wanting to start a whole new project again. This one seemed very, very similar. Project has been approved. In this instance, well, no money has been disbursed, but you know, it was approved by the CDB. They were looking very much towards it, so much so that it's been a classic example of a good best practice moving forward. The whole thing would have paid back itself, I think, in 5 years. And then he comes in and he stops this as well, only to now having to look for funding from other sources. And we've seen it, Castries Grosley Highway, another critical
but even
one.
before you go there, HIA,
he went, exactly.
HIA, remember the original and the Ascenza matter and the investigation that was being conducted in the United States, in the Supreme Court, and the United States, the Southern Court of Florida. There is a pattern of behavior, And I mean, we're not going to look at range and Cabot. That this government, whichever project they seem to have gotten involved in, you see a distinct pattern of how they've managed investments and projects in capital projects in St. Lucia. All of them have been handled in a questionable way. Every single one of them that you can speak about.
The airport I want to touch on, because you're raising it, and of course the issue was that, oh, we don't want to go the route of a PPP. But we're now seeing that in the case of the Daher Mall, we're being told that a PPP can work.
Right.
We're being told that a PPP can work with a derelict building.
Right. We're told the racetrack is PPP. The Prime Minister has said so.
Right.
We've heard that OKEU is PPP.
Because of Health City Cayman and the association there. Yeah.
So you're starting to wonder, why would you want to go PPP in other instances? But in the case of Uranora International Airport, the largest infrastructure project in our history, and most costly, not largest, the most costly, you would decide you don't want to go PPP.
But the issue seems to be more so that anywhere, in any project that has any form of standard, verifiable, transparent procurement process, where you have to go through bidding, you've got to actually do that whole process of you know, getting competitive bidders to sit down and say, hey, you know, and everything's above board. In almost every instance where that is available, and government has sourced funding through that method, it's being trashed for other forms or other arrangements which are very dubious, very questionable, like this one that we're seeing right now.
Precisely, and I think Philip J. Pierre captured it when he spoke about the LED lighting project. He said, look, the fact that Lucilec would be involved means no ministers involved, no direct awards, therefore they stopped it. And you are absolutely right. Whenever they've had any system that allows for accountability and transparency, that has been rejected.
I want to take a reminder, because some people sometimes forget about this whole issue of asphalt and mining, which was there before. I mean, maybe it's a new name right now. So some people are calling it the stale finish project or what have you. But let's look at that issue, because that came up, you just mentioned it. I think we have a clip that deals with just that regarding that whole Ascenza matter.
I am Oslin Crosby. Florida court filings reveal questionable relationship between businessmen and 3 St. Lucian government officials. This is the big story we are tracking this hour on the AM edition of Newsbreak for Tuesday, September 4th, 2018. Now for the details. Court filings in the United States just made public is suggesting a tainted arrangement between a company run by a South Florida man and 3 persons now members of the government in St. Lucia. One of them is Prime Minister Alan Shastney. The relationship dates back to 2009 when Shastney was tourism minister and it is related to a contract to renovate the Hilaire International Airport for $157 million US. An Internal Justice Department memo, part of the inadvertent release of court filings, says St. Lucian authorities believe that the facts are indicative of a criminal arrangement between businessman Antonio Asenza and public officials in the government of St. Lucia regarding this public works project. No one has been charged with anything, and Asenza says he did nothing wrong. Back in 2009, Asenza decided to submit a bid to rebuild the airport. His company, Asphalt and Mining, was ranked last out of 3 bidders by the country's port authority. But the St. Lucian investigation found that Guy Joseph, the public works minister then, was not happy with the result. Joseph presented new details on the asphalt and mining plan to the Port Authority, according to the court filing. The Port Authority reopened the process and declared Asenza's company the winner.
Dr. Hilaire, again, we're seeing the same culprits or the same individuals. I wouldn't want to use the word culprits in this instance yet, but Mr. Joseph, whether it's Guy or Guy, and Mr. Chasney being involved in this situation of Hilaire International Airport. Again, we're back at it again. The PPP scrapped $600 million worth of debt. Yeah. And I was actually reading quite recently the IMF Article 4 consultation report, which was, I think, came out about February before. So this is pre-COVID-19. And the IMF, International Monetary Fund, is saying that this project, at the time they were saying $175 million US was going to add somewhere around 7% to our debt to GDP. So that would have meant that, and of course right now I think we're talking about $225 million US for this project, 3 different sources of loan financing. We had a project which was going forward with PPP, no commitments in terms of loans for the government. Why would a government go this route to commit a country to $600 million worth of debt, especially given all that already occurred, all these issues that have been raised in the past, in the last administration?
But you see, again, the pattern of behavior. Why would a government come into office, find out that the previous government had been negotiating with a foreign investor, DSH, for months, could not agree on an acceptable framework agreement that even cabinet could have considered. Right. Not that negotiation was not going on and compromises were not being made, but nothing had been taken before cabinet. And within 3 weeks of going into government, you would sign an agreement, the same agreement with that investor. Why
we're not even sure it went to cabinet because of the minister, Bradley Felix, said he never even read the agreement.
Precisely. So that makes it even worse. So within 3 weeks of being in government, you sign an agreement that another government had taken months of negotiating and had not ended negotiations. Why with Range, you would have had a model. Range had the same model in St. Kitts. They built a Park Hyatts. In Dominica, they built the Cabrits. Right. And the same model for St. Lucia. Change it. Come up with a new model, some new arrangement. At the end of it, Range leaves St. Lucia with $20-odd million, and we have no hotel.
And that was not the first time that Mr. Chassis did that for the very same site, right?
The same Black Bay,
the
Ritz-Carlton before.
Roebuck, I think it was.
No,
yes,
Ritz-Carlton,
right.
Ritz-Carlton.
Roebuck Properties.
Right, Roebuck Properties. Ritz-Carlton before. And now, if Range had used that same model in 2 other countries, it worked. Decides to change what he found there, and the company leaves St. Lucia with $20-odd million of our passport monies. Why would you do that?
And I want to make the point, though, Mr. Hilaire, because you're saying $20 million, but the government prior to that actually had to go and purchase that land from, I think, what, $60 million or so.
Yes.
So it's almost $80 million when you look at it.
Again, another one of his brilliant investment ideas when he was Minister of Tourism that costed the government $60-odd million. I mean, the long and short of it is that Alan Chasney has been a disaster for St. Lucia from all angles. I mean, forget all the sweet talk. Has been a disaster for the government and people of St. Lucia. And coming back to Guy Joseph, who is his, they seem to work together very well. Every time we've had a project that has some processes that require accountability and transparency, it's been cast aside repeatedly. The pattern of behavior is there. It is there.
Dr. Hilaire, I mean, we have 5 more minutes to go, and of course the time has gone by. I think we've managed to touch on a lot of things, perhaps not to the extent that we'd want to, but of course the St. Lucian public is going to have to make a decision within the next maybe 3 months, maybe less. No clear indication as it is right now. Is it still unclear to the St. Lucian public because you're talking about all of these things, but are people so desensitized by corruption at this point in time? They don't seem to understand the implications of debt and how bad the debt situation is getting right now. Is that coming across to the St. Lucian public sufficiently?
I think I have a lot more confidence in the St. Lucian public than this. There are people that support their political parties, no matter what is done. And it happens on both sides. You have the base. Some people will tell you the United Workers' Party supporters are a lot worse. The level of tolerance of whatever their party does is beyond belief. But there are a lot of right-thinking St. Lucians that are reviewing what's going on. They are seeing what's going on, and that they're not approving of it. But we started this program talking about the failed states and the characteristics of a failed state and the kind of behavior and pattern of governance that takes place with a failed state. And a lot of St. Lucians will tell you that they have nothing to say. When the time comes, we will just go to vote. When the time comes, we will just go to vote. Because these are huge issues in our country. Let me tell you, never before in our history have we had a government that has desecrated all the sacred practices of good governance. Never before. Total disregard.
But aren't you worried that in a situation like this, in a fight like this, where you've got, it's so easy to lie. I mean, for instance, very clear as day, we just saw Norbert Williams, the Prime Minister's attaché, last night lying, saying that the property was sold for $30 million, right? Which is clearly untrue. And he's probably going to go back and he's probably going to say the same thing. And we've seen instances where statements are made and the Prime Minister doesn't seem to know the difference between 800 deportees and 8 deportees. When you have that you're facing and this ability to just repeat and repeat and repeat, aren't you concerned though that it's difficult for people to be able to figure out what is truth out there right about now?
Well, I mean, this is a problem faced by civilization, I mean, global, not just St. Lucia, that the whole issue of reasoning and logic is taking second place to just the expression of any idea or any statement. People are just saying things. And if you say it often enough and if you say it in a manner which seems persuasive, then it's just accepted. The whole fact-checking and the whole reasoning and logic seems to have gone out of the window. So yes, you have to be frightened at the level of society that people can just say things now and it's just repeated. Every statement is a national statement because of the digital space that we exist in now. So yes, you have to be worried that the Norberts and the Champagnes and the Dr. Secrets and Dr. Loves and them can just say anything. Anything.
Whether substantiated or not. And they can just...
it is repeated and there are people that will believe it. I mean, a friend of mine was making a joke with me that somebody was quoting Dr. Secret to tell him something and he had to say, well, wait, you can't have a serious conversation with me quoting Dr. Secret. Who is Dr. Secret? And he just tells you what is happening in the political arena now. So yes, you have to be frightened by that. It doesn't mean I'm always right or you always right, but we can argue and debate and reason. But if that's thrown out of the window and people are just put into the table, not facts, but just anything they want to say.
I think what is definitely a call that you're hearing quite a bit right about now is that people want some sense of justice. Now, they're seeing what's going on, they're hearing it, and they're asking the question, what is going to be done? Are you going to find that a Labour Party government, if it's elected back into office, is just going to maintain the status quo? Or is there going to be a significant change in dealing with this issue and so that we can actually see accountability, that people who in fact are defrauding the state and are being corrupt are being held to account?
Well, for me, I'm very clear in my mind on this. Philip J. will be the next Prime Minister of St. Lucia, I have no doubt about that. And he will take the lead and he will lead the charge in government. But I know for my part, I have been accused, I've been defamed, a lot has been said about me, I'm been brought before the courts. I'm looking forward to my day to clear my name. But everybody else who has been, or there's reason to believe that they are involved in anything illegal or abusive of our state, they too will have to go to court to clear their name. I'm very clear. I have no difficulty in going to court and clearing my name. None. I have suffered for the last 5 years. I've had to ensure that I stay focused. I have the courage and the strength to continue to do what I've wanted to do in the service of the people of Castries South and St. Lucia. But everybody else who has been named or have reason to believe are involved in anything illegal will have to clear their name as well.
Dr. Hilaire, I think the last time that you were here, I think I may have asked this question to you as well, and of course it is about your predictions for the election date and when it's going to happen. We saw, of course, right now we're seeing, the reopening of tourism, and maybe the Prime Minister is trying to find a sweet spot where people have forgotten about COVID, forgotten about 80 deaths, forgotten about over 5,000 cases, and maybe people are back at work, and then that'll be a good time to perhaps call an election. What is your thoughts in terms of your predictions thus far? I mean, we're over the June 6th mark, no dates given thus far, no dissolution of the House thus far. You're still hearing, of course, the Labour Party has come up with their Pan Yo and Pan Sundays. That kind of momentum may very well scare a Prime Minister who is not very sure about his situation. So your thoughts about the election and election result, date and result?
I think he's going to continue to be scared. I mean, the Labour Party is a mobilization machine in many ways, and you can understand why there's the extension of the state of emergency and a lot of restrictions in place, because the Labour Party feeds on mobilization and and building its base and exciting its base. So he'll always be scared of that. But I think you captured it well. The Prime Minister is looking for a sweet spot. He's been waiting for a sweet spot since last year.
That eye in the storm where he can try to fly
Precisely,
through.
exactly. And it has not come. And he's probably looking to see. He thought herd immunity and vaccines might have brought it, until somebody must be telling him it's quite foolish to believe he'll get herd immunity in any short space of time.
10-15%
Precisely. So he's looking for the sweet spot, like you said, the opening up and tourism and cruise ships come in, and they seemingly return to normal life, and things, are booming, and projects really coming on board. And hopefully St. Lucians, like you said, will forget about the mismanagement of COVID and forget about the sufferings for the last year and a half, and go back to a state of complacency, and all the anger and frustration, disappointment will drop, and then they can drop the elections on us. I think he'll be sadly, taught a lesson that, that St. Lucians will remember what they've been through. I still have people coming to see me, like today. There are parents who cannot send their children to school because they don't have any monies. They have suffered for the last few months. And they have suffered not when everybody else has suffered. They have seen a lot of people suffer like them in their social space, and they've seen a lot of people have a very good life. They've heard about all the projects. They've heard about the Pajua letter. They've heard about Cabot. They've heard about all those things that are going around, and how some people are having it good, really good. We spoke about a failed state and the industry and the people that benefit from having a failed state. Well, there were a lot of people that benefit from the mismanagement of COVID. There are a lot of people that are benefiting from all those agreements, the range and the Cabots and the Ojo Labs. There are a lot of people that are benefiting from that. And they've suffered. They've suffered. I mean, the Prime Minister is in Castries South in Cicero, and he's going to visit a certain family. All of a sudden, they've noticed that this is a family with a national athlete, and and what they need and what they don't have, and
there's a lot of youth awards now.
There's a lot of that, and all of a sudden they're discovering the decency of service to the people and taking care of the people. But that's the same government that said Labour Party would waste the money on giving people support and handouts.
And of course, the guy Joseph said that you think that IMF gave you money to give to people.
Precisely, that the IMF did not give the government money to give to the people, but the IMF gave the government the money so their friends, their families could have gotten all the contracts. And they believe the people of St. Lucia will just forget that a little rum and some fried chicken and everything will be okay, and the people of St. Lucia can just be full. And this is why this song, Take Their Money and Vote Them Out, is so, is accepted so much because people are seeing what's happening now, that look, there is an attempt to buy us. And it's almost amazing to see how people are playing the games. They will speak to you on a side and they will tell you who's offering them money and how much money. I mean, in my constituency...
And you must be seeing a lot of that. It's about to say
in my constituency, money is flowing. There's a lot of money. I mean, there are guys who are... they're employing people to do canvassing and giving them advances on their, on their work. And people are getting money. You go and visit a family and you leave a letter, $1,500, as just a goodwill offering. Those things are happening every day, in my constituency. A lot of money is being spent. So they believe St. Lucians will forget about all their hardship, all their suffering. And once they make monies available, then all will be well in the morning. Let's wait and see.
Dr. Ernest Hilaire, thank you so very much for being my guest tonight. Of course, the time flew by. I think we didn't get anywhere near where we were supposed to. But I think very enlightening nonetheless. And let's hope that, of course, for those of you out there who are listening, play your part in terms of this whole effort of political education. It never ends, and certainly there are a lot of people out there who may not be following this program, who may not be following any talk shows for that matter. Those persons who are still sitting on the fence, who are not paying attention to politics, but their vote certainly matters, and their decision certainly matters in terms of the upcoming general election. And so certainly your responsibility to educate and to ensure that we make the right decision whenever that time is called is certainly in your hands as well. So thanks again to Dr. Ernest Hilaire. Hopefully he'll be able to come back soon enough because, again, it's always a pleasure to have him around. So, of course, thanks very much for listening. I'm your host.